Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I am your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. We're all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine skydaddy, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors. But we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We will now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Well, Tim and Tracy, believe it or not, this nation has other health problems besides COVID-2.
Really?
Seems almost impossible to believe, doesn't it?
Yes.
However, cancer still looms large as one of our nation's major health care issues. Our science news story this week looks at a breakthrough in early detection of several different types of cancer. The paper I'm going to discuss was published in Nature Communications, July 23rd of this year. It was authored by Chen et al. And is titled Non-Invasive Early Detection of Cancer 4 years before conventional diagnosis using a blood test. Now, late-stage cancers often lack an effective treatment option. Survival rates increase significantly when cancer is identified at early stages, as the tumor can be surgically removed or treated with milder drug regimens. The average 5-year survival at early stage is 91%, while average 5-year survival at late stage drops all the way to 26%. Detection of tumors at the earliest possible stage is therefore of paramount importance for cancer treatment. Currently, a limited number of screening tests exist for a few cancer types, including colonoscopy, prostate-specific antigen, mammography, and cervical cytology. However, the efficacy of some tests has been questioned, and many patients do not follow medical guidelines for screening. Most cancer types currently lack an effective, non-invasive early screening option. Importantly, a formal demonstration of early detection requires collecting samples years before conventional cancer diagnosis, which is only feasible with longitudinal tracking of a large number of healthy individuals and identifying the very small fraction who develop cancer over time at the incidence rate of cancer in the general population. Now, recently, circulating tumor DNA, and I'm going to refer to that as CT DNA from now on. So again, that was circulating tumor DNA in blood plasma has become a promising cancer biomarker. ctDNA has been demonstrated to have utility for non-invasive detection of cancer, personalized treatment of late-stage cancer, and residual monitoring of cancer during and after treatment. However, current detection studies have mostly focused on detecting cancer in patients who already have been diagnosed, though a few studies have shown cancer detection prior to conventional diagnosis in limited cancer types. Now, the basic premise of using ctDNA for early cancer detection is to look for what we describe as methylated DNA, and I'll describe what we mean by that here in just a little bit. In DNA released from cancer cells. Now, as cancer cells are destroyed by your immune system and other means, the dead cells release their DNA into the blood plasma. This DNA can subsequently be isolated and analyzed for cancer-specific mutations. So if I could have the first figure, please, Tim. Okay, so in this figure, you're looking at a series of capillaries. If you could just kind of circle the capillaries there, Tim. Thank you. And you'll note in the upper middle, we have a cluster of normal cells or healthy cells. Okay, and of course, healthy cells also live and die. And so we'll also get healthy cell DNA into the blood capillaries. And then in the bottom part of the panel, you'll note that we have a cluster of cancer cells that are also dying. And they also have their DNA being released into the capillaries. So the key is how can we determine or detect the cancer cell DNA or the circulating tumor DNA and distinguish it from the normal cell DNA. Okay, next please. Okay, so this slide illustrates the number of types of abnormalities that can be detected by this method. So on the left-hand side, we can have a number of DNA abnormalities that can be detected. We can have what's described as RNA expression and fusion transcripts. And again, I'm not going to go into what all of these mean, just realize that we have multiple routes by which we can detect abnormalities. Protein expression and phosphorylation. And then we can also culture cancer cells in vitro. On the right-hand side shows the various types of DNA modifications that can occur leading to cancer. So we can have amplification and deletion of various genes. We can have their translocation, that is, they literally move from one position in the genome to a different position. Or we can have point mutations, okay, within a particular gene, or we can have chromosome abnormalities. So all of these we can detect utilizing the circulating tumor DNA. Okay, next please. Now, this figure illustrates the concept of DNA methylation. And there's a lot going on in this slide, but really all I want you to focus on is the left-hand panel. So you'll note that we have one of the bases in DNA called cytosine. Okay, and that's being circled right now. And cytosine can appear in one of two forms in the genome, either as pure cytosine, which is the top panel, or in the methylated form, okay, which is the bottom panel. Okay, it's that methylated form that can end up causing problems when you get excessive methylation in regions of the genome that you do not want that methylation to occur. And we'll describe why such a minor modification can cause such big problems here in just a moment. Now, DNA methylation, again, is a natural process. And that process can lead to either genes being turned off, which is the usual thing that happens, or in rarer occasions, genes can actually be turned on. But we're going to focus on genes being turned off. Now, the entire concept of DNA methylation is complicated. But for our purposes, realize that the modification is exceedingly small, but its effects can be quite large. Once a gene becomes methylated, there are enzymes and other proteins that maintain the methylation, thus permanently silencing the target gene. So if I could have the next figure, please, Tim. Okay, and this figure illustrates the basic concept. So without methylation, so that's being shown on the left, the gene is switched on. However, if we get DNA methylation, okay, then the gene gets switched off. Okay, and we refer to this as transcriptional silencing, okay, via DNA methylation. Now, turning off of a gene, if it is the right one, can lead to a cell becoming cancerous. This study has now developed a method for the detection of such methylation events by isolating ctDNA and analyzing it by a method known as bisulfite DNA sequencing. Now, before we leave this particular figure, why would turning a gene off lead to cancer? Well, the reason is that you have two major types of genes or categories of genes that are involved in generating the cancerous state. One category of genes are called oncogenes. These genes, when they are inappropriately turned on, can lead to the cancerous state. The other category of genes is known as tumor suppressor genes. These genes you can think of as acting as brakes on the growth of cells. So if you remove the brakes, okay, the cells start growing out of control. And this is the category of genes that when they become methylated and turned off can lead to the cancerous state. Okay, so if I could have the last figure, please, Tim. Now, I don't want you to worry about all the chemistry components of this particular figure. What I want you to note is that when we have the normal cytosine base, okay, so that's shown on the far left, that can be modified with the chemical compound known as sodium bisulfite. And the net effect of that modification is to, convert the cytosine to uracil. Okay, and uracil is shown on the far right. Okay, so that's what's going to happen in normal cell DNA. Okay, we're going to have the majority of the cytosines converted to uracils. And we can detect this change by doing subsequent DNA sequencing. Okay, so in the normal cell DNA then, after treatment with bisulfite, rather than detecting a cytosine base, we're going to detect a uracil base. However, as shown in the bottom component of this figure, if we have the methylated form of cytosine, now the sodium bisulfite cannot convert that cytosine to uracil. And this is how we can detect where in the cancer cell genome we've had methylation of cytosines take place. So we compare the sequences between normal cellular DNA and the circulating tumor DNA. And as a result, we can detect now where the modifications have taken place. So since many cancer genes are known, and several of them are specific to various kinds of cancers, a diagnosis can be made. The huge value of this study was to show that this technique could be used to diagnose cancers up to 4 years in advance of their detection, as opposed to conventional diagnosis. The authors caution that their assay is not identifying patients that will later develop cancer, and this is an important point to understand, but instead is most likely identifying patients who already have cancerous growths, but who remain asymptomatic to current detection methods. Now, this is consistent with the fact that many cancers do not cause the appearance of symptoms until late in disease development. Okay, so that's the story I have to relate. So discussion. What do you think?
When was that study?
That study was started in 2018. Okay, and 2016. Excuse me. So a couple 4 years ago.
Okay.
And being able to detect early would be fantastic, that early on. Any idea of the sensitivity? Obviously it must be fairly sensitive, being able to, as far as the level of the DNA that they can detect.
Right, so what I didn't go into is that, and it's actually shown on one of the early figures that we looked at. But what I didn't go into is that after you isolate total DNA from blood plasma, you then set it through a amplification cycle or cycles using a polymerase chain reaction.
Right.
Okay, and again, for our listeners, that's simply a means of photocopying DNA. Okay, so you can literally make as many copies as you want using that technique. So PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, has been shown to actually be able to detect the theoretical limit, 1 molecule. So it's amazing, absolutely amazingly sensitive. So yeah, that's this technique we're going to be hearing quite a bit about, I suspect. Simply because of that sensitivity, and of course, the tremendous utility of being able to diagnose early. So why, for example, might you go in early to look for circulating tumor DNA? I mean, that'd be a reasonable question to ask, right? Well, let's suppose that you have a familial history for a particular cancer. Okay,
Right.
so obviously then in that situation, you would want to have early screening. Okay, and knowing the type of cancer or cancers your family's been susceptible to, they would immediately be able to know what gene or genes to specifically examine.
And I could see another application. Let's say that you, based on your work or based on, once they decide if you've been exposed to XYZ, you may develop, have the possibility of developing cancer. So you could go in and get tested to see if you have cancer XYZ from your exposure to this chemical or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Or it could be something as simple as maybe you let yourself get sunburned a lot when you were younger.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, you're a farmer or whatever.
You want to constantly be on the lookout for melanoma.
Right.
So there's a huge number of environmental issues that could also be taken into account if you wish to have potential early screening done.
Right. Once, if they do detect it, is there a way of then tracing it to the source, back to the source?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm certainly not an oncologist, so I don't know what the follow-up steps would be if they do detect it. Obviously, let's say, for example, that you had detected colorectal cancer.
Right.
So in that case, what are you going to do? Well, you're obviously going to have colonoscopy. You're going to be looking for polyps in the intestinal tract. So that would be an obvious thing. Or breast cancer.
Right.
You obviously have mammograms done very frequently. Watching for any potential growths there. Those would be things that you would just be much more conscious of and diligently following through on.
Right. And I guess if you know what here's our chemotherapy agent that we would use, then you could just start that early,
Sure.
if you happen to know, what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, exactly. Whatever the standard treatment would be for that particular type of cancer, you would try to initiate those treatments as early as was feasible. Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty cool.
All
So
right,
then-
fantastic. So, I'm sorry, Tracy.
I was going to say, so then treatment can start right away then, that's what you're saying.
Right. In essence, you should be able to start treatment very early. And again, when you're comparing 91% success versus 26,
Sure.
it's pretty obvious why you want to get things going early.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay. Very good. Great story.
Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and take our first break. So we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, and good inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a reckless fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a reckless fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on August 2nd, 2020. When it comes to terroristic threats, we typically think of Islamic groups trying to attack the West in some way. However, homegrown terrorism is becoming a much bigger threat. Tim has the story, so Tim, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dr. Brad. The original article that we observed the information or read the information from is the NBCnews.com website, and it was a story they posted out of London, written by Willem Marx. And the title of that article, Jihadist Plots Used to Be US and Europe's Biggest Terrorist Threat, Now It's the Far Right. So according to multiple experts and former law enforcement officers who have experienced monitoring violent extremist activity, the threat of terrorism from the far right should be a major concern of governments on both sides of the Atlantic. So after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the governments and law enforcement agencies were really focused on potential threat from violent Islamic groups in the United States and Europe for good reason. But now recent analysis suggests that far-right groups now pose the most significant threat to public safety. So according to Seth Jones, who directs the Transitional Threats Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the CSIS, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank, quote, we see an increasing percentage of plots and attacks in the United States shifting over the past couple of years from jihadist motivations increasingly to far-right activity. Jones defined right-wing extremists as subnational or non-state entities with goals that could include ethnic or racial supremacy. They can also be marked as by anger against specific policies like abortion rights, government authority, as well as hatred toward women. Or they may be members of groups like the involuntary celibates, or incel. The incel movement, that's a group of violent, politically, ideologically centered around the injustice of young, beautiful women refusing to have sex with their members. So these men are often subscribed to notions of white supremacy, misogynistic, and have inspired murders in at least 16 people. Yeah, so what is the evidence showing the increase of the far-right terrorism? So I went ahead and looked at Seth Jones and his colleagues' report, and this is a report that they, again, did or was posted or published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That was titled the Escalating Terrorism Problem in the United States. And this was a June 17th, 2020 article. And I'll post this later in Sounds Reasonable, the link to this article. So based on a CSIS data set of terrorist incidences, the most significant threat likely comes from white supremacists, though anarchist and religious extremists inspired by Islamic State and Al-Qaeda could present a potential threat as well. Over the rest of 2020, the terrorist threat in the United States will likely rise based on several factors, including the November 2020 presidential election. So I'm going to go to my first figure here, share my screen quickly. Okay, so, okay, you guys still see it all right?
Yes.
Okay, so in figure one, this graph here, as you're looking at data between 1994 and 2020, and there were almost 893 terrorist attacks and plots in the United States. Overall, right-wing terrorists perpetrated the majority, like 57% of those, of all attacks and plots during the period, and then compared to 25% committed by left-wing terrorists, 15% by religious terrorists, 3% by the ethno nationalists, which would be like the black nationalism, white nationalism, those groups, and then 0.7% by terrorists with other motives. So what they found in their analysis of those threats, one of the first things was far-right terrorism has significantly outpaced terrorism from other types of perpetrators, including from the far left networks and individuals inspired by Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. Right-wing attacks and plots account for the majority of all terrorism incidents in the United States since 1994, and the total number of right-wing attacks and plots has grown significantly during the past 6 years. Right-wing extremists perpetrated 2/3 of the attacks and plots in the United States in 2019, and over 90% between January 1st and May 8th in 2020. So in that range, that January 1st to May 8th of this year, there were 14 terrorist incidences, including attacks and disrupted plots. 13 of them were classified as right-wing. The other was recorded as being religiously motivated in the context of jihadism. And in both 2018 and 2019, right-wing attackers caused more than 90% of the terrorism-related deaths in the United States. And then notice on the graph that in 2008, right-wing extremists caused almost 75% of the attacks. So let's see. I wonder what happened in 2008. Could there have been a connection between right-wing extremists and Obama campaign and election? I don't know. Maybe. The next graph should pop up there. So figure 2 shows the number of terrorist attacks and plots by perpetrator orientation. The figure 2 indicates that right-wing terrorism not only accounts for the majority of incidences, but has also grown in quantity over the past 6 years. The increase is reminiscent of the wave of right-wing activity in the 90s that peaked with the 43 right-wing incidences in 1995. And if you remember, it was early in 1995 is when you had the Oklahoma City bombing that killed, I think, 138 or so people. And so that one was actually, this was at the time, as far as classified as a terrorist attack, which there's probably been some other, mass shootings that probably would fall under that. But right now that stands as second only to the September 11th killings. And then the 2016, 2017, 2019 number of right-wing terrorist events matched or exceeded the number in 1995, including a recent high of 53 right-wing terrorist incidences in 2017. Despite a moderate decrease in 2018 to 29, right-wing activities have increased to 44 in 2019. So again, according to this report to the CSIS, they believe that the terrorism in the United States will likely increase over the next year in response to several factors. One of the most concerning is the 2020 US presidential election, before and after which extremists may resort to violence depending on the outcome of the election. And then they're also worried that far right and far left networks will be increasing violence toward each other in protests and things like that during this election period. Back in the NBCnews.com article, Jones says that the threat of terrorism has probably increased in the U.S. During the COVID-19 pandemic because of the combined activities of those opposed to lockdowns and other restrictions, anti-federal militia members and their backers, and far-right activists energized by the country's polarized politics or angered by Black Lives Matter movement and so on. High unemployment levels due to the pandemic, poor economic prospects, and the spread of disinformation through the internet and social media could accelerate this far-right activism. Okay, let me go to figure 3 here. So in figure 3, we see right-wing attacks and plots in the United States from 2014 to 2020. And the rise of right-wing activity is not isolated to one region and affects cities of varying sizes. Figure 3 shows the locations of right-wing terrorist attacks and plots in the United States over the past 6 years. And these include incidences occurred in 42 states, including Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Okay, now I have one other little map I want to show you, and I've got to get out of. Okay, you should stop. You should be out of that figure, right? And I want to share. Let me get that. Okay. You see the
Yes, yeah, we got it.
centers, the poverty law center map. Okay, so this is showing in 2019 they tracked 940 hate groups across the U.S. So let's take a look. Nebraska. So you have six hate groups. Now again, this is not just right wing; it's just hate groups in general. So you see, like, you have the AC Skins with the racist skinheads. You have the Global Faith Institute, which is anti-Muslim. The Greater Millstone, which are black separatists. Of course, you have the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the neo-Nazis. They're in Lincoln, and the Patriot Front, which is a white nationalist group, and then you have the Third Reich books out of Fairbury, Nebraska. Tracy, I suppose you want to see. Whoops, I just lost that. Well, I was going to look at Arkansas for you, Tracy, but I messed that up.
You just hit the back arrow, Tim?
Well, let me see if I can get us back.
Yeah, no, I didn't do it.
Oh, here, I've got it right. I got it linked right there.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so let's go to Arkansas, which per capita is pretty high. And so there's 15 hate groups. So you have some anti-religious, like anti-Muslim. You have the Christian Revival Center, which is a Christian identity group. Again, you have more of the Great Millstone with the black separatists. Israel United in Christ, which are black separatists. Kingdom Identity Ministries, which is a Christian identity group. Knights of the KKK, of course. League of the South, which is a neo-conference, or neo-confederate, excuse me. Nation of Islam, the Ozark Craft LC, which is just hate everybody, I guess. So they just hate.
Just general hate, you know.
Yeah, just general hate. The Patriot Front, which is white nationalism. Proud Boys, which is again another general hate.
Yeah.
The Black Panthers, Shield Wall, which is white nationalists. And then Tightrope, which was hate music. At first I thought, well, they don't like music. No, they promote hate music. I thought, oh, groups that don't like music. Yeah. So again, I was just amazed at the sheer number of identified hate groups, and there may be others that have not been identified as well. Real quickly then, to kind of finish out, so the right-wing extremist isn't just on the rise in the U.S. Retired Major General Clive Chapman, the former head of the counterterrorism for British Defense Ministry, was quoted in the article saying, there is a growing trend of right-wing extremists in the UK, but it is not as significant as the rising right-wing extremism in the United States. He went on to say, in almost 2 decades since 9/11 terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, D.C., more Americans, he identified at 335, according to the data compiled by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, have been killed by adherents to a form of right-wing extremism that other than ideologically terrorist. He said terrorists need more than just an ideology to act. They often nurse grievances, such as typically have encountered what is termed a recruitment environment that could be social activity in a real life community, he said, or it could be online. And then Thomas Hedgehammer, a senior research fellow at the Norwegian Defense Research Establishment in Oslo, said that internationally, the recent shift to far-right terrorism activity has not gone unnoticed by law enforcement, but websites that may radicalize right-wing individuals have been far less scrutinized compared to the equivalent jihadist literature. Hedgehammer is quoted as saying, "The threat hasn't been perceived as significantly severe," he said. "To put it bluntly, there hasn't been enough mass casualty terrorism for the right wing of Western governments, from the right wing for Western governments to put the full weight of intelligence apparatus into this. So currently, the limited censorship and law enforcement surveillance of hardcore far-right extremist propaganda on the internet has made it easier for users to access material without inviting attention from government intelligence agencies. So, and the limited censorship. So they're really not, they kind of existing under the radar right now. It has been shown that clamping down on radical online activity works. So clamping down on online jihadist activity has significantly affected the ability of organizations like Islamic State militant group to reach new audiences online and to recruit members, according to Hedgehammer. Quote, "In a sense, we've kind of taken away their communication platform, and now the coronavirus is taking away their media attention." Again, the questions, the kind of ending questions here for discussion, I guess we could have is, so what's fueling the fire of increase of far-right violence? And I think I have some good ideas of why. And then what's it going to take for the US and other countries to wake up regarding the far-right terrorism?
Yeah, so just recently, in the past 2 or 3 days, they had that congressional hearing concerning social media. Zuckerberg and I forget who the Twitter CEO is. But Zuckerberg, of course, is Facebook, and I forget who the Twitter CEO is. And then they had a couple others on there testifying before Congress, asking them, how, what controls are they trying to put in place to, prevent such groups from having a platform for recruitment, obviously, is one, and then spreading their message is another, of course.
Right.
Which oftentimes are one and the same. So I guess we shouldn't lose sight of that. I can understand a little bit the hesitancy of Facebook and Twitter to monitor this to the extent that they probably need to, because where does free speech end and crackdown begin?
Right.
However you want to say it. I'm sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
Censorship.
Censorship, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. So where does censorship begin and free speech end? And so it is a tough thing, but I don't think there's any question that again, you've got to have some limits. You can't stand up in a crowded theater and yell fire.
Right.
There's obviously some limits that have to be put on free speech, and this is obviously brand new technology that is being utilized to spread messages that otherwise probably couldn't get out there.
Right, and of course it doesn't help that our current political climate, we have leadership that basically openly promotes some of those groups or doesn't denounce those groups too. So it gives them more validity and it gives them the red light, or the green light, I should say, to be out there and to be more open and be more active. The one other interesting fact I ran across on this is an FBI report about extremism and terrorists, but they, and I don't know if you guys are aware of this one, but said in recent years there's a group called the Animal Liberation Front, And it's
Yeah,
an
how-
extremist. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with it. They're an extremist animal rights movement, and has become one of the most active extremist elements in the United States. And even though their philosophy is not to be destructive and be harmful, but they have caused, I guess there is some concern about that group. And another one, I guess, is closely associated with that, or well, is similar but not that a distant association, is the Earth Liberation Front. And I guess they were involved in some setting fires at a Colorado Vail ski resort in '98, which caused $12 million in damage. So we've got some other groups popping up there. So that's what I had for my story.
Yeah, so just briefly, back to the election.
Mhm.
I'm really worried. If this election is anywhere near close, let's say it takes 4 or 5 days to finalize the results, or even longer. I'm really concerned of what is going to happen during that time where we're in limbo. I can see Trump, yelling at his supporters, bring your guns and surround the White House. I'm not leaving.
Right.
And as crazy as that sounds, unfortunately, with what he said in the past, it isn't crazy.
No. Fortunately, the U.S. military has more guns than probably has supporters. But
that's very true. That's very true. But I just can't imagine what might happen. Would the military try to defuse it, or would they actually open fire?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. I really don't.
It is scary to think about.
And it's probably and again, on either side, if it's extremely close, if the results either way are very close, then you're going to have you could have protests and demonstrations. You're going to have it from either side probably. And I could envision that if for some unknown reason that Trump does get reelected and it's close, then I think you will see some major protesting and from the independents and Democrats groups and the progressives as well. So
Pandemonium.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, pandemonium is right. I've already told Anna if Trump refuses to accept the election results, I'm going. Yeah, I'm going to D.C. To protest. So
Yeah.
so guys, get ready. I'll take out insurance or something so we keep Sounds Reasonable going.
Well, we can do some remote programs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to any of that. But gosh,
Get out the vote.
Exactly. Get out and vote. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. But well, Tim, thanks so much for that story. That was wonderful research that you did, putting all that in perspective. So thanks very much. Okay, we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come
millennials, individuals born between 1981 and 1996, have been responsible for several cultural trends. However, one that is not frequently discussed is the topic of our religion and politics segment. Tracy has the story. So, Tracy, what are the millennials up to these days?
All right. The story from the internet is called "Millennials Are Leaving Religion and Not Coming Back." And this is from 538.com, and 538 is spelled out. Millennials have earned a reputation for reshaping industries and institutions, shaking up the workplace, transforming dating culture, and rethinking parenthood. They've also had a dramatic impact on American religious life. We don't think about that as much, but 4 in 10 millennials now say they are religiously unaffiliated, according to the Pew Research Center. In fact, millennials, those between the ages of 23 and 38, are now almost as likely to say they have no religion as they are to identify as Christian. For a long time, though, it wasn't clear whether this youthful defection from religion would be temporary or permanent. It seemed possible that as millennials grew older, at least some would return to a more traditional religious life. But there's mounting evidence that today's younger generation may be leaving religion for good. Social science research has long suggested that Americans' relationship with religion has a tidal quality. People who were raised religious find themselves drifting away as young adults, only to be drawn back in when they find spouses and begin to raise their own families. Some argue that young adults just hadn't yet been pulled back to the fold of organized religion, especially since they were hitting major milestones like marriage and parenthood later on. But now, many millennials have spouses, children, and mortgages, and there's little evidence of a corresponding surge in religious interests. So it kind of went the other way than expected, or was anticipated, rather. A new national survey from the American Enterprise Institute of more than 2,500 Americans found a few reasons why millennials may not return to the religious fold. One of the authors of this article helped conduct the survey, the article I'm reading. For one thing, many millennials never had strong ties to religion to begin with, which means they are less likely to develop habits or associations that make it easier to return to a religious community. Young adults are also increasingly likely to have a spouse who is non-religious, which may help reinforce their secular worldview. Changing views about the relationship between morality and religion also appear to have convinced many young parents that religious institutions are simply irrelevant or unnecessary for their children. Millennials may be the symbols of broader societal shift away from religion, but they didn't start it on their own. Their parents are at least partly responsible for a widening generational gap in religious identity and beliefs. They were more likely than previous generations to raise their children without any connection to organized religion. What do you guys think about this? I'm older than a millennial, but have you guys?
We are all older than a millennial.
A little bit older, not that much older.
Okay.
But I mean, I have younger friends and things like that. I kind of see some of this happening.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you guys think?
As a retired college professor, I basically got to experience what I would pretty much consider the first generation of students that would have been raised by secular parents. So literally they never had religion at all in their background. And that would have been exceedingly rare, just 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
So that was the thing that I noticed about it, is that we're experiencing the first generation of individuals that have been raised by secular parents.
Well, this story goes on to say a parent's religious identity or lack thereof, kind of what you're talking about, can do a lot to shape a child's religious habits and beliefs later in life. A 2016 Pew Research Center study found that regardless of the religion, those raised in households in which both parents shared the same religion still identified with that faith in adulthood. Remember, they may still have these questions, but if you go to a hospital for treatment or whatever, remember the blank that says religion. It asks you for religion. And, you might put, Christian or Baptist or whatever. And I remember the moment I started putting none. Is that kind of where that started? And then I saw that blank kind of drop off at some point. So, for instance, 84% of people raised by Protestant parents are still Protestant as adults. Similarly, people raised without religion are less apt to look for it as they grow older. The same study found that 63% of people who grew up with two religiously unaffiliated parents were still non-religious as adults. I've also known a lot of people who grew up in very religious households, and they note that reason that they're not religious now. So that's kind of a different part of the spectrum there. Today, 74% of unaffiliated millennials have a non-religious partner or spouse, while only 26% have a partner who is religious. I think it used to be more important to people to have a partner who shares in their belief or not disbelief. Does everybody hear my cat?
Yes. Don't worry about it. We'll be.
Phone in the other room. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's.
Letter N should be right here. Okay.
He's just saying yes. Is that what? That's what I've been hearing.
Concur. It confers.
Okay. Luke Oliff, a 30-year-old man living in Atlanta, says that he and his wife gradually shed their religious affiliations together. My family thinks she convinced me to stop going to church, and her family thinks I was the one who convinced her, he said. But really, it was mutual. We moved to a city and talked a lot about how we came to see all of this negativity from people who were highly religious and increasingly didn't want a part in it. This view is common among young people. A majority of millennials agree that religious people are generally less tolerant of others compared to only 37% of baby boomers.
Yeah, so if you remember our interview with Tate, that was in essence his position, if you recall. He's currently, and I'm convinced he will work his way completely out of religious belief. But that was his first step. He said, I just could not stand the hypocrisy and all of the other nonsense that went along with organized religion, and so I dropped it.
Right. Mandy, a 32-year-old woman living in Southern California and who asked that her last name not be used, grew up going to church regularly, but is no longer religious. I've seen a whole bunch of that. She's told us she's not convinced a religious upbringing is what she'll choose for her 1-year-old child. My own upbringing was religious, but I've come to believe you can get important moral teachings outside religion. And we all know about that, I'm sure. Of course, millennials' religious trajectory isn't set in stone. They may yet become more religious as they age, but it's easier to return to something familiar later in life than to try something completely new. And if millennials don't return to religion and instead begin raising a new generation with no religious background, the gulf between religious and secular America may grow even deeper. Do you guys agree with that? I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, the way, I don't know if we've ever divulged this to our listeners, but the reason Tracy and I know each other is through Camp Quest.
Yeah.
And Camp Quest, it's about 25 years old now, 25, somewhere in there, as I recall. But anyway, I don't think that's any coincidence that happens to be when millennials came along.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah,
I think that was a pretty good story.
Yeah, it is. It's nice to have some good news.
right.
Right?
Nice to have some good news.
It's kind of, and again, I see, I guess a lot of that too, like you mentioned, Tracy, is that there is that influence by the parents as far as maybe helping them make that shift. And again, I can say it for myself, it's, I just, as soon as I didn't have to go to church or whatever, I did not go. I kind of saw the light, and I felt it was useless, and I just was glad once I didn't have to go that I could make my own choice on whether I went or not. So, and I think you're probably seeing that with maybe just the millennials, even though I'm not even close to millennial as far as age, but I've seen that same thing where either they weren't forced to go or they're allowed to make their own choices, or again, like you mentioned, parents also not as active in formalized religion. So good story.
Yeah, and the other thing I just want to briefly mention here is that, and this is something that Richard Dawkins has pointed out many times, but the reason most people have religion is simply by the accident of their birth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you happen to be born to religious parents, gosh, isn't that a coincidence that you typically end up being religious? And if you're not, I don't think it's any coincidence that typically you will not be.
Right.
And same with country of origin. If you happen to be born in Iraq, well, guess what? You're going to be a Muslim. You happen to be born in Alabama, you're going to be a Christian. So people that have argued that has nothing to do with it, are simply not looking at the facts. All right. Well, fantastic, Tracy. Thanks so much for that story. And we'll be right back after this short break with our crazy story of the week.
I'm feeling so hollow, don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow, don't you know? for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story. So recently, a panel of doctors appeared in a news brief to promote, once again, hydroxychloroquine as a miracle cure for COVID-2 infection. This claim, along with the claim that masks were not necessary for protection against the virus, would be enough to qualify it for the crazy story of the week. However, this does not even begin to scratch the surface. Tracy has more, so Tracy, tell us about this week's craziness.
Okay, this is from thedailybeast.com. Trump's new favorite COVID doctor believes in alien DNA, demon sperm, and hydroxychloroquine.
Maybe
And
we'll
a
call
shout out.
it-
All right, so, and I'm just going to repeat that. Trump's new favorite COVID doctor believes in alien DNA, demon sperm, and hydroxychloroquine. I just wanted you to know that you heard that right. A Houston doctor who praises hydroxychloroquine and says that face masks aren't necessary. And I don't want to subscribe. Okay. Our face masks aren't necessary to stop transmission of the highly contagious coronavirus has become a star on the right-wing internet, garnering tens of millions of viewers on Facebook on Monday alone. Donald Trump Jr., the President of the United States, declared the video of Stella Emanuel a must-watch, while Donald Trump himself retweeted the video. Before Trump and his supporters embrace Emanuel's medical expertise, though, they should consider other medical claims Emanuel has made, including those about alien DNA and the physical effects of having sex with witches and demons in your dreams. Emmanuel, a pediatrician and a religious minister, has a history of making bizarre claims about medical topics and other issues. She has often claimed that endometriosis are in fact caused by people having sex in their dreams with demons and witches. So not like real sex, but in your dreams. She alleges alien DNA is currently used in medical treatments and that scientists are cooking up a vaccine to prevent people from being religious.
Well, that I'd be for.
I think I had that inside of a Jell-O shot one time. And despite appearing in Washington, D.C. to lobby Congress on Monday, she has said that the government is run in part not by humans, but by reptilians and other aliens. Emanuel gave her viral speech on the steps of the Supreme Court at the White Coat Summit, a gathering of a handful of doctors who call themselves America's frontline doctors and dispute the medical consistence of the novel coronavirus. The event was organized by the right-wing group Tea Party Patriots, which is backed by wealthy Republican donors. In her speech, Emanuel alleges that she has successfully treated hundreds of patients with hydroxychloroquine, a controversial treatment Trump has promoted and says he has taken himself. Studies have failed to find proof that the drug has any benefit in treating COVID-19, and the FDA in June revoked its emergency authorization to use it to treat the deadly virus, saying it hadn't demonstrated any effects on patients' mortality prospects. Nobody needs to get sick, Emmanuel said. This virus has a cure. Emmanuel said in her speech that the supposed potency of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment means that protective face masks aren't necessary, claiming that she and her staff have avoided contracting COVID-19 despite wearing medical masks instead of the more secure N95 masks. Hello, you don't need a mask. There is a cure, Emmanuel said. Toward the end of Emmanuel's speech, the event's organizers and other participants can be seen trying to get her away from the microphone. But I think they tackled her. But footage from the speech captured by Breitbart was a hit online, becoming a top video on Facebook and amassing roughly 13 million views, significantly more than Plandemic, another coronavirus disinformation video that became a viral hit online in May when it amassed roughly 8 million Facebook views. Hydroxychloroquine trended on Twitter as Emmanuel's video was embraced by the Trumps, conservative student group Turning Point USA, and pro-Trump personalities like Diamond and Silk. But both Facebook and Twitter eventually deleted videos of Emmanuel's speech from their sites, citing rules against COVID-19 disinformation. The deletions set off yet another round of complaints by conservatives of bias at the social media platforms. Emmanuel responded in her own way, declaring that Jesus Christ would destroy Facebook servers if her videos weren't restored to the platform. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Facebook, put back my profile page. This doesn't make sense. Hello, Facebook, put back my profile page and videos up. Maybe it's hello. It
doesn't surprise me. It doesn't make sense. So
you are not bigger than God. I promise you. If my page is not back up on Facebook, you will be down in Jesus' name.
Oh my goodness. Well,
I think we've heard enough.
Yeah. I wonder if she was do you remember the series V? It was about these reptilian aliens that masqueraded as humans. Maybe she was watching an old episode of that. That's why she thinks.
Maybe, like as she fell asleep.
In charge of the government.
I don't know, but
oh my gosh!
Wow.
But to put a more somber tone on this, 13 million views. So that's let's see, that's about 4% of the country's population tuned in and believed this, in essence.
Did they believe it, or were they making fun of it? Because
I guess I shouldn't say they all believed it. I don't know what the breakdown there is, obviously.
Let's hope they were making fun of it.
Well, let's hope at least a good fraction was exactly. But my goodness.
All right, so that's a bunch of hokey.
Tim, your mic's off.
Sorry.
There we go.
There
I was
you
going
are.
to say, fortunately, she started saying all this other crazy stuff. Because if you watch that video where she's just her little medical group was with her and she's just talking about what she's doing as far as the treatments and all those things, you would think that she's not crazy. But then again, all this other stuff came out, which helped maybe make you think, oh, well, wait a minute, what's going on with this woman?
So yeah, it discredited her. So it's good
Right.
she turned out to sound crazy.
But there
I
are
see what
those
you're
other,
saying.
there have been some of those other frontline doctors that have posted stuff too that, and so you got to kind of watch and see, there are those that don't come off as crazy that are also, still professing this stuff. So.
Yeah, but there, somebody, I wish I should have posted this on the SR page, but somebody actually did the background checking of every doctor that was in there.
Okay.
And all of them had at least some, shall we say, quackery associated with them. Plus, what I was thinking when Tracy originally said she was surrounded by a bunch of white coats, well, typically that would have meant they're taking her away.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen here, I guess.
He's the leader of the white coats.
Well, gosh, thanks so much, Tracy. That certainly qualified as our crazy story of the week. And, I guess the bottom line to this is be careful how you dream these days.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, that will wrap us up for this week. If you have enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying, so long.
See ya.
Bye.